Who gets Parkinson's? This is interesting. This goes back a few years, but right now I can't find a good chart or graph to really, illustrate anything, but it's pretty much the same as it was. It's approximately 2-to-1 men to women. All right. And if we look at it, we know it is generally age related. All right. In fact, there are certain neurologists who say that if we live long enough, we'll all get Parkinson's. Well, might have to be 120 years old for some of us to get it, and others might get it when they're 40. Right. So typically, though, let's see. We'll see in the United States, and this varies around the world too, and that's part of who gets Parkinson's coming up is, for example, now this is going back about 5 years. Statistically, average age of diagnosis of Parkinson's is 62 years old. That was about 5 years ago. Well, if we look at the graph, we can see that between the age of, up until the age of 60, we really don't see a lot of cases. Okay, the darker green, by the way, is men, and the lighter is women. About 2-to-1 men to women. But you'll see that at age 60, you'll start to see more in 70s and 80s. All right, so that's the United States I can speak for. I travel a lot to Mexico, and I can tell you that as of 4 years ago, the average age of diagnosis was 55. Now, I want you to also keep in mind that this is average age of diagnosis. It doesn't mean it's when somebody first actually had Parkinson's or it was in their body. Parkinson's can live in the gut for 10 to 20 years before it manifests in the brain, likely traveling through the vagus nerve and hitting the brain. And it could be a couple more years or more before any symptoms actually show up. We will go through some super early symptoms in a little while and tell you what they sometimes are and what you might want to be mindful of. But keep in mind that average age of diagnosis is one thing, but onset is different. A friend of mine in England took 16 years to get diagnosed, and he was diagnosed in his 50s. All right. I know other people who've been diagnosed in a matter of months from their first visible symptom. So it doesn't tell you exactly. We don't have an exact age when people get it, and we know that it does vary by country. So let's move forward. All right, who gets Parkinson's? Well, this is also as of about 5 years ago. I can't find any new research to say anything different. 5 to 10% are associated with heredity and likely linked with a genetic mutation. For example, the LRK2 gene is a common one that may mutate. When it mutates, whatever triggers it to mutate, or it might just be hereditary, it just mutates, and then somebody has Parkinson's. All right, but if we look at all the other cases of Parkinson's, we can look at, let's say, environmental. Like, it is believed that Parkinson's and other disorders, Alzheimer's and many other things, are believed to be linked to exposure and environmental factors. I've been a control subject in 3 different studies, 2 welder studies and 1 farmer study, because I've never been a welder and I've never been a pesticide applicator working on a farm. And all of these were done by Dr. Shumei Wong. She's an amazing neurologist in Hershey Penn State College of Medicine. And she ran the studies, and there are links to a couple of them here. And the third one I don't have up there. I'll try to post that in the show notes later. So what we look at is, in these studies, there is a higher percentage of people who live with Parkinson's who work in these professions. All right. So somebody who's in this particular study of pesticides, it was paraquat. All right. People who apply paraquat for a living, that's their job. That's like pesticides, like Roundup. It's horrible, right? But it can seep through the masks they wear and the suits they wear and the gloves they wear. And I can't remember the time frame. I believe it was 20 years of doing this or more. Well, you look at it and you see that there's a higher percentage of people with Parkinson's disease in the pesticide applicator field, especially when they're administering paraquat to the crops. Welder study. Well, look at there's a lot of coal mining in Pennsylvania. So coal miners Well, there are a lot of welders in the mining industry, and there are a lot of welders in a lot of industries. All right. So the first study just had to do with welding in general. The second study that I was in had to do with a manganese sulfate that's like emitted as a byproduct of the torch, right? And the effects of manganese sulfate in the brain. Well, if you take all these things, you take the paraquat, you take the manganese sulfate, and who knows what else is out there, right? So many different toxins in the world. And you have long-term exposure to these things. And if you are genetically predisposed to having Parkinson's, well, perhaps this long-term exposure is going to cause the mutation of a gene, and boom, you have Parkinson's or cancer or Alzheimer's, right? There are other things too. Any kind of toxins, radiation exposure could mutate a gene. Even your food, your diet, that's a big one. That's a big one, especially the past 40 years, 50 years, since the early 70s when corn became the thing, right? Corn syrup, corn this, corn that, and what it does to us, pesticides in the foods, preservatives and additives. Okay, I won't go off on a rant about nutrition, but it's so important to eat well and eat clean, eat foods that your body can actually assimilate, and they recognize them as real food instead of fake food, and then they don't know what to do with it. But we know that gut-brain health is a thing. If you listen to the work of, read the books of Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's authored The End of Alzheimer's, and 2 other books after that having to do with the same subject. When I met him personally in New York City a few years ago, he told me Parkinson's, Alzheimer's can live in the gut for 10 to 20 years before it travels to the brain. So there's a lot to think about there, right? And it could be food related and other things too, shampoos, detergents, cleaning products, and so on and so forth. So as we move forward just a little bit more, I want to reiterate that the scientists currently believe that in the majority of cases of Parkinson's, genetic and environmental factors interact to cause the disease. All right. Research into the subject continues every day. Unfortunately, however, is really close to impossible to determine what specifically causes an individual's Parkinson's disease. And there is one quick study that I want to tell you about. It's really interesting. It's an identical twin study. I'll post in the show notes at another time. 100 sets of identical twins. I believe they were all males in this case, but I am not positive. But bottom line is 100 pairs of identical twins, where one of the twins had Parkinson's and one didn't. We know that from this study, 97 of the twins who had Parkinson's had long-term exposure to some type of toxin or were in some environment, okay, that the other twin, their identical twin, was not ever in. Like, they didn't have long-term exposure. So it could lead us to believe that that exposure long-term, years and years and years. Again, I have to reread the study, as I don't remember how many years, but years, could cause the genetic mutation. If they're predisposed to getting Parkinson's, well, exposure, mutate Parkinson's. But the other twin, who didn't have exposure, so they didn't have that mutation. They don't have Parkinson's. There are a lot of identical twin studies on a lot of different things. It's a very interesting subject. Okay, so that really concludes module 1 of what is Parkinson's and who gets it.